I'm John Strickland. Welcome to this year's WTM Virtual Aviation Sessions, and delighted to say our guest today is Ryanair's Group CEO, Michael O'Leary. Michael, welcome. 1 year since we last spoke live, but again in Zoom on last year's event.
Yeah, good morning, John, and good morning to all your Zoom attenders here. It's good to speak to you all. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but we're on our results roadshow this week, so I have to go around and account for my actions with my shareholders for the next number of days. But we're with you in spirit, if not in person.
That's good to hear. Michael, on that note, I mean, a year ago when we spoke, we were just a few months into the pandemic. Things were pretty hairy. Everything was pretty bleak in terms of lockdowns, green lists, on-off routes. How are you feeling a year on? It looks to me like the summer, while not being normal, has been a lot improved on what we were seeing this time a year ago.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, we're all as an industry looking forward with more optimism. I mean, I think the key date was the 1st of July when the EU rolled out the digital vaccine COVID certificate, the DCC, which has been extraordinarily successful. It built customer confidence very quickly. We saw a very dramatic recovery from the 1st of July this year. The UK, sadly, has been much slower. I mean, the inept and inconsistent UK traffic light system really undermined, I think, consumer confidence through most of the summer. So the UK was much slower to recover, but continental Europe recovered well from July onwards. The UK, I think, has been catching up since about October when they did away with that useless traffic light scheme. And we're looking forward. I think we've got just completed a bumper October midterm school break traffic last week. Christmas looks like it's going to be very strong. I think lots of people who've been locked up for the last 18 months, 2 years, are traveling to visit friends and family this Christmas. And I think we'll see Easter again being strong in the run-up to what I believe will be a very strong recovery in summer of 2022, not just of pre-COVID volumes, but also hopefully pre-COVID airfare levels as well.
And the winter period, of course, normally, apart from those peaks you described, like Christmas and the end of the October holidays, is normally a tough time with or without COVID. Do you think we might see a different winter that is overall more strong, just because people will be so desperate to get away, they haven't been anywhere, they may consider breaks and find time to get off work in a way they wouldn't normally?
I think the winter period, will be strong, John, in terms of volumes. Long haul is still essentially locked down. I know the US is talking about opening up from November, but not a lot of people will travel in November and early December. I think short-haul European, both business, VFR, and a little bit of leisure, Christmas market cities will recover strongly through November and the first half of December. But it recovers strongly because of price stimulation. Like, we're selling seats much closer to the day of travel than we would have pre-COVID. As a result of that, we're using much more price stimulation. So I think we're seeing very strong traffic recovery. We carried 10.5 million passengers in September. We'll expect to be very close to 11 million passengers for October, probably north of 10 million again for November, and then hopefully we get close to 11 million again in December. Now, we're running, I think, from about November onwards, pretty close to 90% of pre-COVID capacity, but with lower load factors, about low 80s as opposed to low 90s pre-COVID. But all on the base of price stimulation. So I think strong volume recovery in the case of Ryanair. Pricing will be weak except for the October midterm break, Christmas. But I think it's better to recover the volumes first at lower pricing because that builds customer confidence into next Easter and summer of 2022, which I think will be a bumper year for short-haul travel in Europe, particularly because long-haul travel to Asia, Latin America will still, I think, be subject to COVID restrictions, whereas many more people will stay at home on holiday in Europe next year.
And how do you see the actual backdrop of the virus itself? I mean, you talk there about the UK government's approach, which has been highly restrictionist in terms of air travel, which is quite a contrast to its approach medically in really opening up. Boris Johnson talked about Freedom Day, and right now that's looking maybe challenging for the UK in being an outlier compared to Europe with very high infection levels and hospitalizations creeping up. Do you think there is any risk there, either for the UK or in Europe more widely? Do you kind of get any medical guidance yourself to try to pick our way through this unknown situation?
I mean, I think I think it would be wrong to not rule out, recurrence of adverse COVID developments. I mean, I think we take significant comfort from the fact that in the UK and across Europe, vaccination rates are very high, typically 90% in Europe, a little bit lower in the UK. But that still leaves a reasonable size of the population unvaccinated, 10, 15% of the population unvaccinated. And they're still at risk of, we would be we would be asking the government or pushing governments to be much more stringent about vaccinations. We're happy to see restrictions applied to non-vaccinated people, but we do believe that vaccinated people should be allowed to travel, go to pubs, clubs, nightclubs, restaurants without restriction. They are fully vaccinated, and there should be a reward for that vaccination. But I think we can't rule out further mismanagement of COVID, particularly by the Johnsonian government, which has mismanaged almost everything it's touched thus far. I would be more optimistic that there will be a more common sense approach. Europe has been tremendously successful, but with both the vaccination program and also with the digital COVID cert. But I think there will be bumps in the road this winter. It's inevitable. What we're really looking to, though, is building confidence among the travelling public for next Easter when the schools are off, and then obviously summer of 2022 when we hope to see a very strong recovery.
As you said, I mean, people want to go on holiday. That's a major part of your business. Visiting friends and relations has also had a strong rebound. Again, important to you. Business travel is part of your activity, but not your major focus. And we're not talking about premium cabin business travel, the long haul stuff, which is slower to come back. Do you think that is really the fundamental reason why you have confidence in terms of the future? Because you've actually upgraded your projections over the next 5 years, haven't you? Now talking about 225 million passengers a year within a 4 or 5 year period.
Yeah, again, I think there's a split between short haul and long haul. We've seen a very strong recovery in business travel on short haul, between Ireland and the UK, between the UK and Europe and intra-Europe. Lots of smaller businesses are out there meeting suppliers, doing deals. They've been locked up for 18 months. The building trade in particular, supply chain challenges have caused, if anything, have given a greater impetus to short haul business travel as people try to resolve kind of supply chain blockages, particularly at the ports and airports in the UK. So we see no reason why that short haul travel, business travel, won't continue to grow. And I think we grow very strongly. I think long haul business travel will be a much slower recovery. More of that long haul business travel, I think, will move to Zoom and online meetings. But short haul, no, I think that will recover very strongly. And we're already seeing that at the moment. What drives we've significantly upgraded our growth forecast in Ryanair for the next 5 years. We've upgraded from a target of 200 million passengers by 2026 to now 225 million, which means we're expecting 50% growth over the next 5 years from a pre-COVID 150 million to 225 million. What drives that is, the order, we increased the order for the MAX, the game changers, the 737-8200s, the MAX game changer aircraft from 135. We uplifted that to 210 aircraft in December of 2020. We are seeing extraordinary growth opportunities all over Europe, both at new bases in Croatia, in Spain. We're opening a new base in Newcastle, in Cork, but also enormous growth opportunities at existing airports. We're putting, for example, 11 new aircraft into Vienna next summer. We're putting 7 new aircraft into Stansted, where EasyJet has withdrawn, closed its Stansted base. We have done a deal with EasyJet to acquire their base slots. And we're adding 3 more aircraft at Manchester next summer. So where other airlines have significantly cut back, in the UK, Flybe, Thomas Cook have disappeared, Level in Austria, Germanwings in Germany, Norwegian, which has blown itself up in Gatwick, Paris, in Spain, has kind of concertinaed down to being a small domestic intra-Scandinavian carrier. And also the very large fleet reductions. Alitalia has reduced its fleet effectively by 50% from 110 to 55 aircraft. TAP is reducing its fleet by about 30%. So we see enormous growth opportunities in Italy and in Portugal in particular next summer. Already we've announced new bases in Italy at Milan, Malpensa, and Venice, Marco Polo, Naples. We're adding 3 more aircraft next year. Because if we don't step in there, Alitalia will, or ITA, or whatever they're calling themselves next week, will be in there trying to raise fares on the back of massive government subsidies. We intend to keep the new Alitalia honest. We intend to keep the cost of air travel for our Italian customers and visitors low, and we intend to grow much more aggressively in Italy, in Portugal, in the UK, to fill up the gaps left by those airlines that have either gone bankrupt or significantly cut their fleet size as a result of COVID.
I mean, that's a phenomenal list of activity, Michael. But I mean, frankly, it's not unusual for you guys in Ryanair. You've always been pretty fleet of foot in moving the aircraft around and taking opportunities. Do you think, notwithstanding what you just described about the backdrop, that you are in any way changing the mentality and how you look at routes to markets? All the airlines you look at these days are all talking about being agile. I mean, I would have said that was something you could have applied to yourself over the whole time I've looked at Ryanair's activity. But is there anything different? Are you doing anything that's even more short-termist in moving aircraft from one place to another, on top of those big themes like bases and filling gaps where other people will fail or retrench?
I think not really, John. I think we've always been pretty agile. I think if anything, the challenge at the moment is, we have, even despite the fact that we'll take 65 new aircraft for the summer 2022, it's not enough aircraft for the growth opportunities we see out there. So I think the big challenge for us, or what's different at the moment, is that there's so much growth opportunities out there. Nobody else is able to kind of take up those growth opportunities because they're all cutting back their fleet, or they're short of crews or whatever else it is. And I think we need to be sensible in the way we allocate those resources. So we're trying to balance the growth next year by allocating a lot of aircraft to existing bases while still opening up 14 new bases. So I think in the past we would always have been, probably trying to run ahead of the natural growth in the marketplace. I think what's new for the next 3 or 4 years is there's more growth out there than we can actually handle, even with our very aggressive fleet expansion over the next 4 or 5 years. So the opportunities have never been greater. Airports, to be fair, are much more aggressive about, recovery and incentivizing traffic recovery and growth. That is, airports accept the monopoly lunatics like Heathrow who think, the way to handle a COVID crisis is to give the rich shareholders another large dividend and then go back into their captured regulator and look for a 50% increase in costs, which they expect consumers to pay. So the rich, already over-dividended shareholders can get even richer. But most other airports operating in the real world, I think, are working closely with Ryanair on recovery incentives, on discounts. And a number of European governments are also aggressively incentivizing traffic recovery in Ireland, in the UK. Spain, for example, AENA has agreed to keep its airport charges fixed, I think, for the next 4 or 5 years. So I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities out there, and low-cost opportunities for both traffic recovery and growth for the next 5 years.
And that growth underpinned, as you said, by the growth in the fleet to more than 600 aircraft and fulfilling the entire original combination of orders and options for the MAX, taking a whole 210. For now, you've called it a stop to discussions with Boeing about more, or looking at the larger 737 MAX 10. Is that something you could imagine coming back to, or do you just think for the time being there simply isn't any need, and you don't want Boeing to get the feeling that Ryanair is a locked-in customer in any way?
Well, I mean, we've always been opportunistic when it comes to aircraft. I mean, I think, we were publicly, I think we said publicly, we were very close to doing a MAX 10 follow-on order in the early part of this year. For some strange reason, and we're not sure what, Boeing changed their mind and kind of came back to us with a pretty remarkable price increase on the MAX 10 order. We said, look, coming out of COVID, certainly in Europe, there's no justification for a price increase. I'm not quite sure what Boeing's commercial strategy is at the moment, given that it's losing customers all over Europe. Jet2 announced an order to go with Airbus. IAG, which had previously signed up a heads of agreement for a MAX order, has now reopened that up and invited Airbus back into the bidding. And we suspect with the new Spanish management, Airbus is much more likely to win that order. So I'm not quite sure what the management in Seattle is up to at the moment, but we've been pretty consistent over a 20 or 30 year period. When aircraft prices are cheap or distressed, we'll buy. And when the manufacturers get all ballsy and start raising prices, we will politely decline to participate and we'll wait for the next crisis. I mean, the only good thing about the airline industry is, you know, you're always just 4 or 5 years away from the next great crisis, and we'll happily wait for it.
And looking at the competition, I mean, just talking about the low-cost carriers, I'm interested to see the evolution that's been taking place recently.
There are no other low-cost carriers, John.
Of course not, Michael. Of course not. I mean, if I look at what's going on with Wizz Air and Joe Verardi's comments recently, much more bullish, talking about Wizz being a 500-plus aircraft airline, nothing confirmed, but possibly an additional order going in on top of what they've got, and not again confirmed, but they seemingly would have been the bidder for EasyJet. They want to grow. I guess you guys are going to rub up against each other more frequently than you do. And then EasyJet, a different story, still much more cautious. You said yourself that I think last time we spoke, you don't see EasyJet remaining independent. And in fact, you believe if indeed they are bought, it would be more likely to be a network carrier. How do you look at those two companies?
I mean, as I difficult, you kind of covered a raft of things. Like, you know, Joe talks his own book. I mean, generally, I think he talks a lot of rubbish. You know, they have, I mean, they're clearly in trouble at the moment for I presume, Cruise, because they're cancelling routes and cancelling bases all over the place. But I presume that would be reasonably short term. Their aircraft are very expensive. They've already kind of said that aircraft discussions with Airbus are taking place at the Indigo level, so the shareholder level. So I assume Wizz, if they expand the fleet, will continue to expand the fleet at very expensive prices. Ultimately, we don't run up against Wizz that often. You know, they came into Norway, withdrew after 10 weeks. They have a small foothold in Italy, but they're going nowhere in a hurry. You know, they've done well in Eastern Europe prior to Ryanair expanding rapidly in Eastern Europe, and they're down in Dubai and in some of those other markets. So I think not unlike EasyJet, they're looking for markets where they can expand, where they don't have to compete with Ryanair. Good, sensible strategy. EasyJet have gone ex-growth. You know, they're not particularly low cost. They do have, you know, an interesting presence there in, you know, in expensive airports, expensive slot-blocked airports. So, you know, they're just playing a kind of a cheaper me too to the incumbent carriers in Gatwick, in Paris, in Switzerland. At most of the airports where they compete with us, they're in gradual decline. They, you know, withdrawing aircraft from Italy, from Portugal, where we're expanding rapidly. I've long been of the view, though, that Europe will, in the next, you know, 5 years, coalesce around 4 major airlines, not unlike North America. You have the Lufthansa family, the IAG BA family, the Air France KLM family, and Ryanair will be the low-cost carrier. I struggle to see how a second low-cost carrier or not so low-cost carrier will survive, because ultimately it won't be able to compete with Ryanair on efficiency or price or cost. But I do believe if you could somehow put maybe Wizz and EasyJet together, then strategically there might be a 5th carrier. It would just be 4 high-fare carriers and 1 low-fare carrier. But, you know, they are both Airbus operators. EasyJet has a reasonably well-defended position at certain high-cost airports in Western Europe. Wizz is in Eastern Europe. Neither of them want to compete with Ryanair. So you put the two together, it probably, you know, would be, would see them survive as an independent alternative. It's just they won't be very competitive against Ryanair, but they'll be very competitive against the legacy carriers. I still would be of the view, you know, that I think EasyJet is more likely to get taken out by an IAG or an Air France KLM in the next number of years. I think IAG would covet EasyJet slots in places like Gatwick. Air France would sew up a monopoly again in Paris, Charles de Gaulle and Orly if they took out EasyJet. They'd quite like to have their bases in their presence in Switzerland. And if that were to happen, I could see, you know, again, Lufthansa could take out someone like Wizz. It would give Lufthansa that kind of Eastern European market that they previously had with Austrian and Lufthansa before we emerged as Eastern Europe's largest carrier. So the tectonic plates are shifting, and as always, it's impossible to know what way they're going to kind of, you know, how they will fall or align. But I would still be on balance of the view that in the next 5 years, once the state aid has to be repaid, Lufthansa probably finishes up acquiring or merging with SAS, Wizz, and probably Alitalia. Air France KLM probably will, I think, merge, acquire EasyJet, and BA IAG will see TAP come into the fold. You know, and then gradually, so you have 3, not unlike in North America, 3 high-fare, high-cost connecting carriers and one very large low-fare airline, Ryanair in Europe, Southwest in the States.
Well, I mean, certainly very interesting, hypotheses for those network carrier groups, and all three very different. I mean, do you see also a difference the fact that Lufthansa and Air France-KLM have been much more touched by government funding? I mean, obviously, these stakes, particularly the French government in Air France-KLM, Lufthansa rapidly trying to pay down, the German stake, but looking like they may have that to contend with in their own wishes to take commercial decisions for the future.
I mean, it is, but like the reality of life is, no matter what the EU legislation says, the Germans will always bail out Lufthansa, the French will always bail out Air France. It doesn't matter if there's, breach of state aid rules. I mean, the French have nakedly broken competition rules, state aid rules all over the place. Certainly in the airline industry, allowing the French registered airlines to have a discount on airport taxes or refund of airport taxes, but all the other airlines don't. So it has long been, I think, the great weakness of the European Union that whenever the French and the Germans want to break the rules, they're allowed to break the rules, and everybody else is told to obey the rules. But we are where we are. But it is inevitable, I think. It's very difficult to see how Lufthansa, having received, or Alitalia survives as an independent airline, whether you call it ITA or Alitalia, it will re-emerge 50% bigger than Alitalia, or smaller than Alitalia was. Alitalia's lost money for 74 years in a row. ITA will keep losing money. So you've got to find some kind of outcome there. And I think TAP can't survive as an independent airline, nor can Alitalia, nor can LOT in Poland, nor can the crazy Scandinavian, SAS and Norwegian, which both lose money heroically. And really, it seems to me, maybe, accentuated by environmental pressure as well, and maybe environmental taxation, that these airlines come together, you have more sort of merger M&A activity. So you put together the big legacy carriers into these kind of cooperative groups, because none of them will be able to compete with Ryanair on price or on efficiency in the next number of years. But I think we will move the same way as North America has moved. What I'm uncertain about is whether it'll be 4 carriers or 5 carriers.
Mm-hmm. I mean, putting some of those together would be one heck of a difficult melting pot, wouldn't it, for any management team or indeed a government to pick their way through?
Yeah, I mean, it would, but they're really difficult. Like, how do you manage Alitalia on an ongoing basis as a standalone airline? It's on its 55th package of illegal state aid, massive loans. I think an Italian consumer agency produced a report in the last month saying that Alitalia had burned its way through 13 billion of not state aid, but Etihad's money, Italian government money, Italian taxpayer money, airports money. They don't pay their bills, and it's not sustainable. It can't continue. And I think politically, during the COVID crisis, I think the willingness of the Italian citizenry to keep bailing out a mess like Alitalia, or the Portuguese citizens are being asked to pay, 3 billion to GAP. Look, it carries 10 million passengers a year. The population is 10 million. 300 euros for man, woman, and child in Portugal is being wasted on bailing out TAP instead of being spent on hospitals and schools in Portugal. I think those days are over.
At the other end of the spectrum, Michael, we see a raft of startups coming. You talk about Norwegian retrenching back to essentially domestic or intra-European operation, but we've got Flia coming along, we've got Play, we've got North Atlantic. Everybody is shouting, how they're getting fantastic deals on aircraft now, with the glut of aircraft available, new and used, of good quality. But do you think they're all deluded, or are any of them going to get the right idea and maybe find at least a niche of activity?
I think you will always have tiny niche airlines, the Great Dane Airlines, which I'd never heard of, went bankrupt last week. So there'll always be these small Mickey Mouse niche ones, but is there going to be another Ryanair emerge out of Europe? No, and the reason for that is because Ryanair is everywhere in Europe now. There isn't a price point across the European continent under our $9.99 lead-in fare or $14.99. There will be people doing domestics or, intra-Scandinavian stuff at 900 euros one way. They'll be there for 6 months and disappear. The Norwegian model has always been fundamentally flawed. It never made any money, despite having efficient aircraft. They've proven that long-haul, low-cost doesn't fundamentally work or isn't going to be profitable. But really, in strategic structural terms, I think we're moving inexorably towards a North American type market where you have 3 or 4 large legacy airlines providing connecting services, and Ryanair providing all the low-cost point-to-point efficient air access across Europe for the next, I don't know, 5 or 10 years.
And Michael, we're nearly out of time for the chance to hypothesize about the future. One big issue, of course, which is never going to go away, is the one of the environment. You've done a lot. I mean, of course, your fleet is modern. Engine efficiency technology is coming through. You've committed to use of sustainable aviation fuels at 12.5% by 2030. But the pressure is on. You know, the industry, of course, is still in the spotlight. There are political moves, the new EU Fit for 55 legislation. How do you see the industry finding its way through this? I mean, SAFs, the sustainable fuels, are a challenge. I mean, they are probably about the only pragmatic solution against, you know, new technology. Hydrogen and electrics are decades away for large aircraft. But the politicians' view tends to be much more stick than carrot. Do you have any optimism we can up the stakes and get much more of a collaborative approach, get more public investment in the technology to speed things along?
But I do think as an industry, we need to turn the kind of, you know, turn the kind of attention back on the politicians. You know, they're screwing the airlines and our passengers for egregious amounts of environmental taxation. Last year in pre-COVID, Ryanair paid 630 million in environmental taxes to governments all over Europe. Not 1 cent of that money was spent on the environment. You know, and then the governments come back and say, and now they want carbon offsets. Well, we're already paying you all this tax for your carbon offsets or environmental taxes. Spend that money on it. If European governments are really serious about, you know, the most significant thing European governments could do to reduce the impact of aviation on the environment is a single European sky, which is for 25, 30 years has gone nowhere. I mean, if we could eliminate all the air traffic control inefficiencies, strikes, failure of the French to show up every Saturday morning, you know, you would reduce fuel consumption among the European airlines by between 10 and 20%. It would transform the environmental performance of airlines. But certainly, and I agree with your view, for the next 10 years, all we can do is invest in new technology. Ryanair is investing over 20 billion in new aircraft, which carry 4% more passengers, but burn 16% less fuel. So we are doing our part. We are investing very heavily in new technology. I am somewhat more skeptical, but you know, about, you know, these kind of greenwashing projects like hydrogen and, you know, electric propulsion, because they're at least 20, if not 30 years away. You know, they're not going to be here before 2030. So I think what we can really do then is sustainable aviation fuels, and governments must commit. It's government that have to deliver volumes of sustainable aviation fuels. Again, with my farming hat on, I'm slightly cynical about sustainable aviation fuels, because, you know, you get to a point where, you know, you're using kind of food supply, you know, to generate alternative fuels, and all of a sudden you're driving up the cost of food on for citizens and consumers, and that makes me feel somewhat uncomfortable. I mean, I think the most important thing we can do as an industry is invest in new technology, explain to our customer base that we're paying huge amounts of environmental taxes each year on their behalf. That should be used to offset our carbon output. But ultimately then, you know, try to significantly improve the efficiency of our industry, which means getting rid of all these national air traffic control providers who screw up air travel for all European passengers and citizens. Move to a system like the States, where air traffic control is managed across 2 or 3 centers, and you would significantly reduce flight times, you'd reduce flight delays, and you would massively reduce both fuel consumption, CO2 emissions as well.
A lot of work to do, Michael, and I'm sure we'll
as always, Tom,
in a year's time, in maybe a decade's time. But you and I will have moved on. You'll be on the beach down in Faro, and who knows where I'll be. But Michael, thanks very much for your time today.
John, good to talk to you.
On
best wishes to everybody at the World Travel Market. God bless.
Look forward to seeing you in person next year. Thanks a lot, Michael.